Good morning, everybody. My name is Namrata and I'm the co-founder of ShiftEco, and I'm here with
Anne-Marie. I'm the managing director from the Umbrella Institute. And yeah, thank you for coming today. It's excellent.
And we're really, really thrilled to launch the SDG series. We had posted about the SDG series last week. The whole idea of this series is to introduce all of you as consumers and companies to the SDGs, help understand how we can practically use them. From ShiftEco's side, we are an online platform for eco-friendly products. And while we are in the business of selling, one thing that we take a lot of pride in is doing sessions like this to educate consumers so that we are becoming conscious consumers at the end of the day. And we have with us the lovely Anne-Marie, who's a specialist in SDGs and worked with a lot of companies on the same. Do you want to share a little bit about the Umbrella Institute with us, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for calling me a specialist. Like, I think I've been passionate about the SDGs since I learned about them in 2017. And back then, they were really something we discussed with national and big government entities. And even back then, there was a lot of discussions about what to use them for and unclarity. And I think this is still very much the situation in many places, and specifically for our customers, right? You have mostly individual customers, and I have a sustainability advisory in the UAE. So we work with especially mid-sized and large companies around their sustainability transformation. Many of them have heard about the SDGs. They have worked with them. They have selected 3-4 ones that they are putting on their website and that they're working with. But when it comes to the trickling down and really taking a deep look at it, we all kind of pause, because the insight is we're not really sure what we may do and what we may not do. And are the SDGs for us, or is it only something for governments? Is it only something for large companies? May we use the logos on our website? Like, there's a lot of questions. That means that instead of working action-oriented, fear is a big part of it, right? We are afraid to know how we can work with the SDGs. So I think this is what you and I want to do. We want to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, for individuals, for you and me, for any sort of consumer, old, young, and then we also want to talk about it from a business perspective, why it makes sense to work with the SDGs.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other addition that I want to add is we want to introduce the SDGs to people interested, and we're going to be running fortnightly sessions. Each session will be focused on a particular SDG. We're going to invite some speakers for specific SDGs where relevant. But the whole idea is it's an effort from ShiftEco and the Umbrella Institute side to just spend some time every fortnight on the SDGs, find out their relevance and how we as consumers or as corporations can actually embed them in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. And I think one of the most important things of sustainability is keep asking questions, right? Like, question your own position in the world, and are we doing the right steps? So we are talking to each other both as individuals, but also as companies, right? Are we doing the right thing? And how can we help our customers do the right thing and be open and like accountable to them and explain what is happening and why we're selling the products we are and the services we are.
Absolutely. So without much ado, let's get started. I think for us initially, since this is the first episode of the SDG series, Anne-Marie, can you give us a background on the SDGs, how they came about, any background information?
Yeah. And you, Namrata, you can ask any questions at any time, okay? You are actually the voice of everybody. So ask if there's something you think that needs more information, because there is a lot of information, and over I think the next many episodes, we will revisit many of the things in deeper perspective.
Yeah.
But basically, the 17 SDGs, you can probably, sorry, I will see them. I'm looking at my screen and opposite. But the 17 SDGs, you've probably seen these colorful logos many different places. There are 17, here in the bottom, you will be able to see, I think you can only see number 4, but there are 5 in the bottom. They represent the basic needs for human beings. So everything from not being hungry to being educated and having a good life, right? And then once you go up in the numbers, it becomes a little bit more complicated. The Sustainable Development Goals were made and decided upon in 2015, mainly for national governments. So they are government tools to make sure that we create a globe and a society around the world where we don't leave anyone behind, where different countries are developed and reaches so that we, for instance, don't have countries where people are hungry and poor and not educated. So it's about these 17 goals that you discuss. How can, for instance, I come from Denmark, you come from India, right? How can Denmark help other nations create prosperity? And what's wrong in our societies? Why are we still having people who are not educated or who can't read or who are hungry? And back in 2015, 193 countries accepted these 17 goals and agreed upon them and said, yes, we will be reporting on these yearly, including that is the UAE. And they submit a yearly report to the UN around what's the progress. And the whole discussion is sometimes you progress on some things and some things are left behind. For instance, now that we've seen the COVID health crisis for the last two years. So then you can work on a lot of things, let's say equality and sustainable communities and production, but maybe overall health or education, that we've seen a lot of people and a lot of youth have had to stay home, right? So they weren't educated the same way.
Right.
And overall, it's just tackling very complicated and very interconnected matters. So once you tweak on some parts of the Sustainable Development Goals, then you will automatically also tweak negatively or positive on something else.
Right. And that was my next question, the interlinkage between them, because even as governments, it's really hard to work on all 17 goals at the same time. So is there a prioritization of goals? How is it done?
Yeah, I think this is the core of what we want to discuss, right? I think both for national governments, for individuals and for companies, we have to sit down with ourselves, so with the teams we're in, and say, which are the goals that are of highest priority to us? Let's say we have hungry people in our nation, or that some of our people are not educated in the companies. Perhaps this is our main priority. So you can select 3 or 5 or 17 that you want to work with, but you have to at some point prioritize what you want to take first, right? Because the more you can focus on 1 or 2 or 3 goals, then you can really start, and it still connects back to the other goals. So it's not saying that we will not work with the other ones that we don't mention, but it's just saying that we really create a focus around these.
Right.
And I think that notion has been understood by many companies and by many individuals and by all the nations in the world, that there are some that are more important to than others.
Right. So you mentioned that nations are reporting on these goals and they're being tracked. Can you tell us a little bit more about the reporting element and how they're being tracked at the end?
Yeah, for sure. So there are 17 goals. Interlinked with these, there are 169 targets and 232 indicators. So the targets, let's say, for instance, SDG 11 has a handful of targets that are timely and really much more ask into details about something about sustainable communities and cities. So it means that once you start to look at these targets that are part of one SDG, then you get new questions that a country or a regional government can look at. And under each target, there's also indicators, and the indicators are really also linked with very simple things. It can be saying, for instance, no poverty is around reaching that no people in the world have less than $1.50 a day before the year 2030. So it's called Agenda 2030, because that is when the SDGs are supposed to be reached, like unanimously for all nations in the world. And when you then come back to the question you had, every nation should and are tracking their progress on each of the goals. And they create a report yearly that they submit to the UN. And for this, there's also a global report saying, for instance, we are on track with SDG 12, and it's more and more positive, and we can see different regions who have been lacking behind, that they are now getting in. But it's also showing where the gaps increase, right? When we have crises like the health crisis or economic crisis and that sort of thing. And it's really very good because it's a way to measure that some countries, they move ahead and they're going well, and they understand what their key issues are and they are working with them.
Yeah.
But the SDGs are interconnected, and so are nations, right? So very often when one nation is not prospering, then there's a country next to it or close to it that is also not doing the same. So we have to tackle these topics being mindful of the interconnectedness of ecosystems, of people, of communities, of economic zones. You can see like it scales in complication. Yes, did it answer your question?
Yes, it did. I'm going to be a bit of a cynic when I'm asking this question, but these goals seem very, like, it seems like wishful thinking to have no poverty and zero hunger, knowing some of the nations that go through a lot of this, right? So how do you think these goals are going to be achieved by 2030? And given the tracking, is the UN changing the target, or how is the reconciliation of these goals?
Yeah. I think this is an excellent question. And this is really the core of what we have to keep asking ourselves. Are the goals helping? I think I know 100% that because these 17 goals exist, we're discussing topics that we would otherwise not be discussing. And we're discussing it on a higher level than we would do otherwise. From my side, when I use it for the clients that I have, I call them amazing communication tools. And it's because there's a group of very smart people around the world who have sat and made these goals, who have really discussed it in details, who are specialists in different areas, and who come from different nationalities, different regions. They've been like made an inclusive and sort of diverse group. And for that reason, they've posed questions that many nations would otherwise not think about.
Right.
I think if I look at my own country, Denmark, I would believe that a question about zero hunger and poverty is something we neglect to ever think about, because we're doing well, but there's still people in Denmark who are suffering from not being able to eat at night or have a bed to sleep in, right? And this scales up for different regions. So then you can start to talk about, for instance, life on land. But if many people don't have food to put on the table, and they don't have a job, and they don't have really the basic needs, then they will do whatever they need to do, right? And that's often depleting the land for some kind of resource. So I think the easy answer to your question is yes, because of the SDGs, we're questioning whether we're doing the right thing in a much more organized fashion. And we all have the same language and the same targets and indicators to do it by.
Right. So my other question would be is like, when a government is reporting on these SDGs, how is the trickle down? Like, how is it coming from other corporations, people? Because it has to be a data exercise, I would assume, to see how you're doing on the SDGs. So is there a mandate to companies to report back? How does the loop get?
I love this question, okay? This is what my company is trying to help with. No, there's not a mandate. The SDGs are voluntary, which is, it's very broad. It means, do you like the SDGs? Do you understand that they're interesting for your company or for you as an individual? Good. Do whatever you want to do with them. Like work with them in a responsible manner. And hopefully you will learn something from it, and also disclose what you have learned and what your next steps will be. For companies, it's the same. It's a voluntary exercise that I know is an amazing way to create innovation inside companies, to break down silos between different departments, to just overall refocus on what is our company good at, what are we solving with our products and services, and what is our long-term vision. But it often, what we see is it's complicated, right? Explaining that you're not the best at, for instance, SDG 12, which is many production companies who look at it.
Yeah.
It means that when do you start to say that you're good at something? Because that's what we all want to be, right? We, especially here in this region, we want to be number one. We want to be fast. We want to be cool. We want to be good at IT. We want to be really good at transforming ourselves. But sustainability is a long, it's a long-term challenge. And when you reach your 2020 goals, then you will set new goals for 2025 and the years beyond, because then new things come, right? So when it comes to companies and individuals, there's not a lot of mandate to ask for the information. So here in the UAE, for instance, we have a council that is asking for the data from the companies, and they include that in the yearly report. And that's also what's happening around the world. The UN itself is very good at trying to engage companies and people and create a momentum around it, motivate and inform and share cases. But in the end, what we somehow lack is time for sustainability, right? And what I can see is when I go to companies, they want to say, yes, we are a sustainable company, and we've also been working with the environment and our people and our positive and negative imprint. But do we have time to pull it out of everybody's calendar, let's say an hour a day or 2 hours a week, or when do we do it? And how do we make sure it doesn't cost a lot of time, and where do we measure the impact?
Right. That's interesting, because I think companies it needs to be a mandate for companies to do it, because I would assume many companies don't do it because it's not necessary and it's a nice to have, not a must. Yeah. So how are companies rewarded for SDG reporting? Is there a incentive scheme there so that at least they're encouraged to?
Yeah, I'm sure there are in some countries. I don't know specifically to the SDGs. I don't know of any. I do know that regions like Europe is more and more mandating, especially the large companies. So it's usually the 250 largest or the 550 largest in a nation that needs to report, or if they are listed on the boards, then they need to disclose what they're doing. So it's mainly large companies we mandate to do this sort of disclosure. And they also need to do their audits and their financials. So it comes in this sort of reporting. But when you then look at the numbers, right, here in the Middle East, here in the UAE, I think something like 94% of companies are SMEs.
Right.
And there's no mandate for us, because we're small and we're flexible and we move and we turn up and down. And we also want to survive, right? We want to make SMEs survive. So putting a mandate on, let's say, making an SDG report or reporting into a specific system, we don't do that.
Right.
Although I am a really big, I really believe that once you start to work with the SDGs, there's so much money to be made for companies. And you can see that they really start to think about new opportunities. So if you mandate them, I'm sure that the companies who do work with the Sustainable Development Goals make more money.
Yeah.
But it's just depending on whether it's half a year later or 3 years later and when they realize it, right?
Right. I think it's like any change, right? People are always averse to change initially and then they get comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Coming back to the 2030 agenda and trying to understand that a little bit more. So what is the 2030 agenda?
Yes. Well, actually, we need to step back a little bit further even, because this is called the 2030 agenda. But before that, we had something called the millennial goals. And these were 8 goals. They were not as measurable and timely. They didn't have targets the same way. And they were only meant for developing nations to develop further. And for that reason, I think not many people have ever heard of these, and they were not something that, you know, that you just felt was relevant to you if you were not a government or an NGO in a developed nation. But it also, I think it was a really good step because they learned from those goals that there had to be targets, there had to be indicators, there had to be some things that you measure and that you go for, right? That you can set goals. So that's a learning factor. And then the United Nations also has something called the 10 principles. And these 10 principles are divided into 4 categories. And it's about human, like, it's about environmental, human rights and laws, and a 4th one that I right now can't say. But they are really a baseline for human well-being. So they are also a part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so we're building further, right? We're building now to making targets that are relevant for a global society, but also for different nations to work with on their positive and negative impacts. And that's what the Sustainable Development Goals are. I believe that there has been talks about an 18th goal, a 19th goal, moving back and forward, deleting some. Goal number 17 as an example of something that came later. And that one's really a meta goal because it's about making sure that the other 16 are reached in partnership together, businesses and governments and NGOs and individuals. And then what we also have is the word sustainability. It really stems back from something in the mid-80s called the Brundtland Report, where we discussed what sustainable development is. And this is about not doing something today that will ruin the lives of the future generations. Right? And that's the baseline for understanding what is it we're trying to achieve. Do we just want to make everybody not hungry today, and then 10 years from now, everything falls apart? But it's really about creating a balance, right? And that's these goals.
Right. So things like zero hunger, that was an excellent point. And I guess we'll go into it in a lot more detail when we have our individual sessions for each SDG. But my question is it assumed that by 2030 we will have no poverty? It'll be zero hunger. Is that the assumption?
That is the goal. That is to reach. And later in the coming series, I'll show some of the very interesting trackers you can find online. You can see the development that has happened over the past now 6 years. And it's really taking numbers. We are almost 7.5 billion people in the world, and you can track what happened to the hunger since 2015. Right. Fewer people are hungry now, but then other things went up and down, right? And you can, again, because it's so interconnected, yes, they are not hungry, but maybe there's something else that then went wrong. Like a lot of people have moved to cities in these past 6 years. And that means that something like being able to have a decent job is really important, right? We measure goal 1 by, I think it's $1.50 a day. Below that, then it's pure poverty, and there's still around 2 billion people in the world who are like going up and down. So whenever there's a financial crisis or a health crisis, a lot of people dip back into this. And of course, what we're trying to make with the Sustainable Development Goals is a more balanced like behavior with this, that not a lot of people dip down and come back up when then there's a financial boom again.
Right.
But that's complicated, right? It's really tweaking little factors. But then when it is talking about, especially the first two, these are in very particular regions of the world. And you don't just see it going from, let's say, $1 average income a day to 10, right? It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So there are very big challenges. And so coming back to the question, yes, it is supposed to be that by 2030, we reach these goals together with our different impacts, and ensuring that we also stay on track.
Great, great. So I think this was a great overview for the 17 goals, and I'm really excited to delve into each of them individually with you, because I have so many questions, but a lot more specific to the individual goals. But I think as an introduction, this was amazing. So there are no more questions.
What do you think, when you look at your clientele, the people who come and buy your products?
Yeah.
Are they aware of the SDGs, or is it a different part of the reason that they come to you?
I think it's a different part of the reason. I think a lot of people come to us because they basically want to get away with toxic material in their day-to-day lives. I think a lot of it is to do with the health implications of a lot of it, right? So a lot of people want to use clean skincare because it's not good for them to have these toxic materials on their skin. From the home care perspective, some people are very aware of the climate crisis and they kind of want to contribute. And a lot of people are aware. The people that are aware are doing it more from an environment reason. I don't think it's a reason for SDGs. And that's where I feel consumers are disconnected with the SDGs. One really important reason that I've been so passionate about starting this series with you, because I think the conversation around them should be a lot more and easily accessible to consumers.
I think you're completely right. And I think just like you say, that so many consumers has it as part of their own values, right? To do good for nature and for the people around them, but that we have become such consumers, like it's convenient, right? I didn't write the word convenience here. Convenience is a really, really, modern sort of thing that has enabled us to just forget everything else, as long as it's easy to go and get my cup of coffee or go and get a big bottle of shampoo. And so I think that there are many of these aspects where we need to think about time. How do we make the new steps for a sustainable future easily accessible, easily understandable, and just ready for someone else to be part of, right?
Right. No, I completely agree with the convenience part. In fact, we've done a bit of research to understand why people don't think twice before they are consuming products. Why aren't they conscious? And one of the core reasons that came up was convenience. That they didn't want to change their lifestyle around. Now with the advent of home deliveries for everything, the whole culture is that we want everything now at our doorstep. We don't want to have to brave the traffic or the lines to kind of get a product. So it's changed consumer behavior around a lot.
And this is also what we know from our own selves, right? If you want to change, let's say, your hair shampoo, you know what you have and you know what you've been using for the past X years. So when you change something, then you just need one really bad experience, and then you're like, okay, I'm going back to what I've always bought. Yeah. It's easy, it's simple, I don't need to question it.
Yeah.
So we need to help consumers, first of all, like test different ways of getting into their everyday lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are generally a little skeptical of sustainability. They're scared of it, right? Because they're like, oh my God, I'll have to change so much around. And then they aim for perfection. And I think my issue with sustainable living is this aim for perfection, because there'll always be something you can do better. And I think I personally view it more as a journey where you start taking some responsibility, make that responsibility a habit before changing other things around, so that it doesn't shake your system in a drastic way as well. And also, I feel that, a lot of times people change things around, like, oh, I'm not using a plastic toothbrush, I'm using a bamboo toothbrush. But hey, the bristles can't be composted. So no solution is perfect. But as long as it's better than what you were doing in the past, I think it's a step in the right direction.
And this is where I think SDG 17 is really interesting, because we need to create partnerships, right? You and me, we've made a partnership to explain the SDGs to anyone. And in the future, anyone can come and ask us questions. We won't have them all the answers, but they can come and ask. And then what we need to find out is where, for instance, can we take your old used bamboo toothbrushes and have them composted the right way? And maybe someone will have a way to decompose or do something with the bristles, right?
Yeah.
And that's another partnership that we can look at. And then we can start to report on it, say, these are the impacts. This is why you come to me as a consumer.
Yeah.
And when you buy this toothbrush from me, then this is what happens compared to what you usually did.
Yeah.
But it's such a complicated matter for individuals to do. And you and me will not go very far for a toothbrush, right? We will not pay very much extra. We will not go very far. We will not spend 2 hours on researching, and we will definitely not change our trashing behavior immediately if no one tells us how to do it.
Yeah.
So there's a whole channel and a whole lot of things around every single product that we have to communicate.
Absolutely. There's just so much to cover that I don't know if these 17 sessions ahead would be enough, but I'm excited because it's a great start, and I already feel like I'm learning from this session already. So really looking forward to the sessions ahead, Anne-Marie.
Same. And I know that we have a lot of people who want to be part of it. So let's see who we can put into this so that it's not just our two voices we hear.
Absolutely. No, we're very happy to collaborate and have people over, and we will see how we can do that in a feasible manner for the next session. But thank you for whoever has watched this episode. I think it's a great starting point on this 17 episode journey ahead. And we'd love to collaborate if you have ideas, and if you want to be part of certain episodes, we are very open to collaboration. Feel free to write to us, and we'll see how we can kind of incorporate that.
Definitely. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.